Brené Brown has one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. However, what I want to talk about is how Brené Brown represents the perfect propositional enchantment for people. Now, why do I use propositional enchantment? Well, Brené Brown is ostensibly a researcher, and we'll get into what that means. Don't you worry. And the way she got really popular was this TED Talk, which is one of the top 5 most popular TED Talks ever. And that's why people know her. It's called The Power of Vulnerability. And I did listen to it. And I have to tell you, dear viewer or listener, I really think that because I did this for you, and I have heard her TED Talks before, but I went out of my way to listen again. I have a buy me a coffee link down below. Please consider, because I need a lot of something. I don't drink coffee, but I drink tea. I'll go to Starbucks or something and burn up as many of those little gifts as you want to give me. Believe me, it's really hard to listen to for me because I know what's going on, and she doesn't hide it. And just to give a quick summary of the talk before we get into the nitty-gritty details. And look, I listened to the talk. I wasn't going to write my own summary because I was busy throwing up the whole time. So I had AI give me a nicer summary than I could have written, given how disgusted I was by how she was saying what she was saying. Vulnerability is not a weakness, right? So she flips the script on the typical view of vulnerability as like a bad thing. And there's some nuance there for sure, which I will be getting into. Defining it instead as a necessary for opening of connection, right? To open up to a connections, you need to be vulnerable. That's not true, but again, we'll get there. It is the source of innovation. All researchers who are these weird sort of stoic, relationship inept sorts of people aren't able to innovate. I mean, that just seems silly, right? And she teaches that vulnerability is the literal birthplace of innovation and creativity, which I cannot imagine anything less true than that. I don't even know. Some things are so wrong. You just don't know where to begin. And it requires stepping into the arena, whatever that is. Embracing vulnerability means having a go and being an active participant in your life rather than a spectator. I mean, I guess like a lot of these problems you'll notice sound very particular to a certain type of person, which might be part of academia, like Brené Brown, I guess, which she's very upfront about. Like this was me, right? So fair enough. Putting yourself and your work out there guarantees that you will face critics, but it's a necessary step if you want to be brave. If you want to be brave, sure, maybe. You must choose courage over comfort. She emphasizes that being courageous is not always comfortable. And I don't know why those two things would be associated with one another anyway. And she notes that we have to make a choice. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, which is excellent, by the way. Like, absolutely true. And this is the trick, right? That's the trick. True things mixed with things that maybe aren't quite so true. And it's transformative, this vulnerability, right? So ultimately, having the courage to be vulnerable has the power to fundamentally transform the way we live, love, parent, and lead. But what is she really sort of on about, we'll say, at a larger level? And where does all of this come from? So one of the modes of enchantment that she's using here is she says things like connection is why we are here. And it's like, I don't know. Connection's kind of how we are here and how we remain here and fight things like depression. Why we are here? It sounds very strange to me. And, shame is the fear of being unconnected. And she uses words like courage and compassion and connection. And using those words is fine. And, there's nothing wrong, but you really have to have a deep framework to use those words. So words like courage, compassion, and connection in general probably are only good when you're talking about a story. That's when that becomes good. Now, the interesting thing is the way she sort of backed into this research was she was, trying to figure out what was going on, and with shame in particular, and shame is bad, and empathy allegedly combats it. And I'm like, that's definitely, I can just tell you from personal experience, nah. And she thinks that empathy is the heart of connection. And empathy is a wonderful word because everybody wants whatever that is. A few people can define it, we'll say reasonably. And it's highly dependent upon context, right? What you mean by empathy. And empathy is usually a one-way lowering of yourself to the position that the other person is in. It's a type of condescension. Now, I'm not against condescension as such. When a lot of people use the word condescension, they mean arrogance. They just don't know the difference because they're not very well educated. And, she says things like empathy feels different for different people. That, then is it a thing? Like, if it feels different for people, are we properly naming whatever it is we're trying to name? Because I've got questions. I mean, maybe, but I've got questions. And she says receiving it can look different. And some people, she says, want help solving problems. Some people want to be heard without interruption. Well, it might behoove you to interrupt people before they get too far down their own self-enchantment. I have a video about that, by the way. Very important. Some people want physical comfort, or some people want less eye contact. Well, I thought this is about connection, right? And the thing is, that sounds a lot like the different love languages. And the book, what was it? The 7 Love Languages. I think it's the 7 Love Languages. Maybe it's the 5 Love Languages. Whatever. It's a great book. Everybody should read it. It's not Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, but it's better than that in many ways, because it sort of talks about the different perspectives people have when they're thinking about love in particular, right? Like, how do you show love and how do you perceive love? Right. Right now, this person shows love this way, but I perceive love this way. But once you understand that there's a difference, you can sort of relate to it and say, aha, this person does love me. It's just I didn't see it before because I didn't understand that what they were doing was a sacrifice made, for me, right? That's one way of showing love. It's not the only way. And so the interesting thing is when she talks about these things, it's very vague. It's super vague, actually. And she's just making claims and assertions without backing them up with any. They're not even logical progressions. That's the interesting thing is, for a researcher, she's making no logical progressions. She's just making statements and saying this and this are connected in this way. And it's like, well, but they're not. Like, some of them are clearly not connected in that way. And the telling part here is she tells the story about how she thinks that she's a storyteller researcher. And I was like, well, that's an interesting way to classify yourself. And why would one of the most popular TED Talks be done by somebody who says they're a storyteller? Even though TED is, at least ostensibly, about putting out research data and getting you in touch with the scientists. And so one way to kind of step back and look at this is to say, what was TED? What are TED Talks? This is the popularization of science. I mean, this is peak scientism. And I'm not condemning all TED Talks or anything like that. I've enjoyed quite a few TED Talks. I've also seen some atrocious TED Talks. This one was one of the more egregious ones that stuck with me the minute I saw it. I was like, this is horrible. Who is this person? What is wrong with this person? Like, why are you talking like this? And it's interesting because in a way, she's actually not telling any story. She's mentioning some people's experiences that they told to her via story, which is very disconnected, isn't it? It's very interesting when you look back at what she's doing. And so she comes into this thinking that she is this storyteller researcher. And I don't know what to, like, I don't know how you can come to that. Like, story is the soul of research. I was like, what? No. No, 1,000 times no. Research is not supposed to be connected to that. And there's a specific reason why she believes that, which we'll get into. And the thing is, the sort of flip is here because she says she was asking people, about love, and they would tell her about heartbreak. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't have that experience, but I guess if you do, you do. Like, that's that's fine, right? And so you'd be asking people about one thing as part of your research, and you get the answer of the negative case only. And that's what she implied. And well, she said it outright in her talk. And that's the flip, right? The flip is here. And so she's trying to do research on something in a positive fashion. Research is supposed to be positive, actually. And she's getting these sort of negative results, responses from people. And also they're like responses from people is probably a good hint not to use people responses as your thing. And we'll get into that later. And she then contrasts vulnerability with controlling and prediction. And I'm like, oh, well, fair enough. Like, if you are trying to control the world or predict the world, which is sometimes maybe the goal of certain sciences, which might be a problem with science, but that's a different topic for a much longer video. If you want to see that video, comment below. So vulnerability, I mean, I wouldn't call it opposite or anything. I don't know how to cross those two, actually, controlling and predicting versus vulnerability. And she says she was pledged to research, right? So she's doing this research on shame and vulnerability, and she figures out she's pledged herself to research, which is the opposite of being vulnerable. Very strange, because science like claims outright that they're all about innovation. And she said earlier, vulnerability is the source of innovation. Here she is a researcher, which is typical for researchers. I can just tell you because I've met a hell of a lot of researchers, and they're not vulnerable. Yeah, I agree, but they're claiming to be the innovators. So one of these two things isn't true. I mean, this is a contradiction, and you got to kind of resolve it first. So she eventually calls a therapist to deal with what she calls a breakdown, and she very cleverly says therapists call it a spiritual awakening. Isn't that interesting? And it's funny. One of the things that makes the talk really good is she's funny. And she is what anybody, I think, would reasonably call being vulnerable. I don't think she's putting on a show at all. I don't think she's being disingenuous. I think she's sadly mistaken about a bunch of things and horrifically confused about the terms she's using. She's certainly not using them in a scientific way, which I am okay with this, but the science people aren't supposed to be. That's the problem. If you're making a claim that we're science people and we use evidence and research and come to, theories through testing hypotheses, none of that is here. So you have to make up your mind if are you a scientist or not? Are you in research or are you not in research? And the thing is that because she became very popular on TED, a lot of people followed her. I have a very good friend who followed her, and I had to kind of tell her, like, no, Brené Brown is not the kind of person you want to follow because she cannot ever give you pragmatic advice on anything. Nothing that she delivers is going to link to the real world in any useful way. And of course, many people have tried to disprove me about this. And I'm like, hey, man, I'll tell you what, like, I mean, I'm open to being wrong. Just let me know what advice she gives or what conclusions you've drawn from her work that give you something to do in the world that connect to reality, right? And I'm still waiting for an answer. Like, make of that what you will, but also, like, I do these little tests all the time. This isn't that hard. Like, if you think that's true, show me an example. That's all. And if you can't show me an example, and I've already come to the conclusion that it's not true, I'm not going to believe it's true. It's not a magic trick, right? It's a very simple, straightforward thing. And so her quote research uses this purely qualitative methodology. And I'm like, what the hell is a qualitative methodology? So she's using interviews. Interviews is a form of self-report. Now, I'm just going to tell you, because I tried to, I'm always using new ways to research from, I got to refresh my memory and stuff, right? So I was using the AI, and I kind of asked the AI, like, what do you think of this, self-report? And it's like, oh, self-report is valid, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I already know it's not. I'm like, no, the AI is being extraordinarily overly optimistic to the billionth degree. It's completely and I knew that already. AI is completely unreliable for negative research, right? If you're trying to find a negative condition to something, AI is just terrible at it, right? And so I said, like, well, what does science say about self-report? And then I got a very different view, right? And so she's using interviews, and she says it's a grounded theory, right? Because she's analyzing raw data, and then through grouping, coding, and sorting, she's identifying patterns and then building her own theories from the ground up. Now, in other words, not observation. Like, she's not observing the world. She's taking people's stories. So let's take a moment to kind of break down why self-report might be completely unreliable. So when we report, say, how we feel, well, first of all, I don't know if anybody else knows this, but I know this. Emotions aren't easily put into words. And I don't mean we don't have a word mapping to an emotion mapping. We certainly don't. You can tell a very long and complicated story and not get at your emotions. It's not hard because emotions are complex. Emotions are variable. They exist on a spectrum. And aside from things like anger, which is really not an emotion, it's more of a perceptual shift, right? When you see the world, when you're angry, things change. Is that an emotion of anger, or is the emotion of anger only when you're punching people or things? Because I've put holes in many a wall in my time, smashed entire chairs to bits. It doesn't quite match, right? Like, what is anger? Just being mean to people for no reason, because there's other reasons why you might be mean to people without intending it, right? So it doesn't really capture an emotion. It sort of captures a set of ways in which you interact with the world because you're blinded by negative thoughts, right? Or a negative experience, right? Which would cause negative thoughts. And see, even just describing something, you would think, oh, the anger of emotion. It's not that straightforward at all. A lot of the things that could be due to anger could be due to other things. On the other hand, a lot of people, and myself included, would say you can kind of tell when someone's angry, right? But it's not one incident. It's not, oh, he punched something, so he's angry. Because often you will punch things, walls, and destroy chairs because you're frustrated. And you could argue, well, frustration is a form of anger. Is it, though? Is it? Frustration can manifest in anger, maybe, right? But that would be frustration plus anger equals violence. I don't think it's that simple either. See how difficult it is just to try to boil this down? You can't really do it. It's really kind of impossible. But let's set that aside and let's suppose, like, oh, emotions. We have words for the emotions. It's fine. And we have enough agreement about a thing like anger or a thing like love, definitely isn't true, right? Or a thing like sadness or depression or any of these wacky words that cover a range of different manifestations that we can do, some sort of science on them. Well, it turns out that even when you have, we'll say, reasonable propositions for things, people are very bad at getting the right words out pretty regularly. I struggle all the time myself. And I'm pretty good at it. I know this. So people have told me that my whole life since I was very young. So that's already a problem. So maybe you know what your emotions are, and you know that whatever exists, but you express it badly, because people do that all the number of times I talk to people and they express themselves poorly is usually called all the time, but it's not all the time. It's very close though. It's not unusual, especially with emotions, because when you're recalling emotions, now you've got two problems, right? Because that emotion is kind of welling back up in you, or sort of on your periphery all of a sudden, and you have to kind of hold like a mini version of it, plus, your state now, and it gets very iffy, right? And so it makes it hard to communicate. So that's another problem. And then the third problem, of course, is the interpretation of the listener of your emotion. And a lot of times when people do this sort of qualitative research, I guess is what we're calling it, strangely enough, what you'll get is they'll have to, and fair enough, like I'm not saying this is not necessary, there's a way around it, they'll have to inject a set of words that they have in order to elicit it, not from everybody, but from a number of people, right? Like, oh, it sounds like you were sad. It sounds like you were angry. It sounds like you felt upset, or whatever it is, right? I was like, well, okay, but that's an additional interpretive problem. So you've got the fact that it doesn't map directly to propositions. You've got the fact that mapping things to propositions is already hard for the speaker. And then you've got the mapping that happens as a result of the listener. These are like massive interpretation problems. And so when you say the ground up, do you mean stories that people told you about how they think they felt in a moment? And remember when I said earlier in pure psyop format that, sometimes you can kind of tell when certain people are angry? But maybe they can't. Oh, doesn't that prove my point? Yeah. You often don't know when you're angry, or when you're in a bad mood, or when you're in a particularly good mood. We're not good at evaluating our own emotions. And why would we be? It's the water we swim in. Makes perfect sense. Okay. So she makes a number of other, what I would call research errors, right? Like she lets her subjects read her conclusions and then give her feedback. It's like, what? This is a weird thing to do. It's this self-consuming Ouroboros of research. And, I guess everyone's a scientist now or something. And she thinks like research is a human process. And I was like, really? So are most things. Like, I don't, and you can't take the researcher out, right? And so she uses personal examples in her studies. And it's like, well, what? So you've injected yourself into your studies. She often translates things to laywoman terminology, of course, because she's a woman, and the feminism is just poisoning the world. And so these are not like gold stars. These are black marks. Like none of this is good. None of it. But you can see she's acting as a mediator, a translator, and a storyteller, according to her, a storyteller, between the scientific technology and the way people might think about or conceive of this in the real world. And again, she says some wonderful things, like this idea that to a therapist, it's a spiritual awakening. To you, it's a breakdown. Like, that's actually quite clever. And so by using these things that are correct and using all of these they're all second order abstract terms, right? They're not even abstract terms. That's bad enough. They're second order abstract terms, right? Things like innovation and creativity. It's like, what the hell do you mean by that? A connection, opening. Like, what do you mean opening? What are you opening? I don't understand. Like, how do you open for connection, right? She's using these really, really high up in the clouds words all the time, right? Courage and comfort. And she's, can't have both. She's putting them into a false dichotomy. I would argue that courageous people often go into dangerous situations with a level of comfort, at least externally. That's why we think they're courageous. So it's a false dichotomy. And that's the problem. When you have somebody using words like this and terms like this, what happens to you is you hear what you want to hear. You hear something that makes sense because it's coming from an authority, and it is. And you want to cooperate with that authority because they're promising you something that will improve your life. Fair enough. And maybe in some small way it will, although I don't think she's doing the magic there. I think you're doing it to yourself, which is not a bad thing. But also, like, why is she the one with all the TED Talk views? And it's because of this story, right? This is a typical story level enchantment, except she's not employing story level enchantment. She's employing narrative level enchantment. And if you don't understand the difference, I, of course, have a video on that, which you can see here. So there's a difference between these things. And she is tying together a bunch of stories that you have about yourself for yourself. What's holding you back? Oh, you're not vulnerable enough. And that's preventing you from making connections in the world. And connections are why we're here. I mean, all of that follows from what she says in that first big talk of hers. All of it. It's kind of required to think of it that way. It's just that happens to be wrong. Okay. So because she has her own science, she's using her own scientific methodology, it's very hard to call anything she has a hypothesis because it's not repeatable by other people. But she's built a career around doing this. And the story she tells is a personal story about her personal breakdown as a result of figuring out that science isn't the thing. Rather explicitly, I might add, like, from her own report, the only conclusion you could possibly come to if you were paying attention to that part, which you weren't, you were paying attention to her, which is the part of the enchantment. But if you're paying attention to that part, science bad, which I happen to agree with. Science bad. It's like, okay, well, there we go. But you have to listen real carefully to the sciencey part. And so the thing is, because it's not a testable hypothesis, because it's done on this idea of direct reporting, we need to sort of break that down. Like, what is the problem with this? And it turns out its reliability is a matter of what specific metric is being measured. So if your goal is to measure a physical fact, like how much food did you eat or something, self-reporting is horrible. It's terrible. It's awful, right? If the goal is to measure an internal state, like how much pain you're in, what else are you going to use? Okay. If the best you can get is what else you're going to use, that's fine. That happens a lot. Not very scientific. Right? And so the consensus, according to the AI, is that self-reporting is most reliable when the recall window is less than 24 hours. In Brené Brown's case, it never was. The questions are low stakes, right? They're not tied to social status. And the data is used to measure trends, in other words, directionality, rather than absolute values, right? That's what that is. It's not a scientific thing. At best, it can be employed in science along with other tools, kind of maybe. The self-report is terrible. It's just terrible. And that's all she uses. And I mean, she says she collects stories, which is just research with the soul. I mean, this is nutty talk. And she enchants people by giving them these terms that are so abstract, you can't get a handle on. So let's just go back and review some of these terms that she's using, because it's important to understand the enchantment and how it works. Courage. What is courage? Well, you can't boil courage down to an action. An action in one context is courageous, and in the other is foolish, and the other is unnecessary. It's just bragging. She uses compassion. Well, she doesn't define compassion. What do you mean by compassion? I mean, everybody, like, compassion sounds good, especially when you're doing like psychological framing or individualistic framing. Everybody wants compassion from other people. Like, we want to feel connected to people. That's how we feel connected to people. We feel their compassion. She uses a connection. Well, what do you mean connection? Like, I have a bunch of Facebook friends. Am I connected to them? I would say no. Other people would say yes. The tech bros would say yes. That's how you get connection. You send a friend request and they accept it, and now you're connected. And it's like, what? No, right? But we want connection, and so somebody says connected, and we go, aha, I know exactly what you mean, right? Up to and including the fact that people think you have, quote, friends on Facebook. I mean, you may have friends of yours that are also on Facebook, but you don't have Facebook friends. Like that, you don't have. They may use the term Facebook friends, but I don't know what that means. I think it's kind of insane. Can it be useful? Well, lots of things can be useful, so it's one of lots of things. But who talks like that? Like, tech bros do. And they fooled you with that. Right? They fooled you with that. And so you can see how this, how this works. That level of abstraction allows you to insert yourself into the narrative. Now, when the person on stage is inserting themselves into the narrative, if you take René Girard seriously at all, and maybe for some things you should, you're going to mimic that behavior of the person on the stage. Person on the stage is telling you their personal story. You're relating to the person on the stage. You're putting yourself in the personal story and then trying to connect with what's being said. This is one of the top 5 most listened to TED Talks of all time. I wonder why. I can't figure it out. It's Enchantment. It's very good Enchantment. She's quite good at it, probably accidentally. Again, I don't think she sat out. She clearly did not set out to have a popular TED Talk. She talks about this in a talk about a year and a half later, where she's like, I wanted to get rid of that talk. I can't believe I did that talk. And she's talking about, do you remember when you sneak into your boyfriend's room to erase the voicemail you left? And her friend's like, no. And she's like, this is like, what? And yeah, I think she wished she hadn't given the talk right after she gave it, because it was about vulnerability, and she's a researcher, and small surprise, which she talked about in the talk. The levels of flip and irony here are amazing. And so that interaction, we'll call it, with the speaker, who's using these terms that are completely undefined in the talk, maybe undefinable in general, in some cases at least, acting out, being part of the research, having a self-discovery moment or a awakening moment, spiritual awakening moment, right, which feels like a breakdown, which is a very weird way to talk, by the way. Also not entirely wrong, right? You have a breakdown, and then something from the outside comes in and saves you. Yeah, well, I hope so. That would be good. It'd be better than the alternative anyway. So you mirror that, because we're mimicking creatures. We mimic what we see. And she's up on the stage. We're mimicking what's up on the stage. So we're doing what she's doing. And now we're scientists too. And we all have stories we can tell where we felt vulnerable, or we shut out vulnerability and that was a bad idea. Everybody has that. That's a pretty universal thing. And so you take advantage of those universals when you talk like that. When you get into abstractions, it's very easy to universalize things. It's just that that's not representative of the world, because the world isn't full of universals. I mean, there are universals in the world, but man, there are a lot of things that make us unique too. And my ability not to get caught up in the nonsense, enchantment somehow, and hear what her basically indictment of science was, which I bet nobody heard that. I bet nobody heard that in her talk. But it's right there. Like, I would just say it's right there. It's 100%. Like, if you logic it out, if you actually take the next step, the next draw conclusions from what she was saying, some people might call that critical thinking. I call that just thinking, because there's no criticality required. You just say, if this and this, then this. It's not that hard. Then I think I don't see how you could come to another conclusion. I think the only conclusion to come to is science bad, research bad, because, now I happen to disagree again with a bunch of what she says, but it's really important to understand this is what, 2010, this is part of the rise of scientism. And scientism is attempting to be a religion, basically, right? It's a huge cult where you're wicked smart too, just like those guys. And you can use the science tools and wield them to fix yourself, which is just complete and utter bonkers nonsense. Jordan Peterson telling you to clean your room, if you actually do it, that works. That works remarkably well. But if Jordan Peterson had said, well, I had a spiritual awakening when I cleaned my room, no one would do it. That's the thing. No one would do it, or almost nobody. It wouldn't have met with the same level of success. And that's why I don't think Brené Brown is really any good. Like, I don't think she's any good. I run into a lot of people who like her a lot. And I understand why. And it's not like she's no good or a bad person or any of that. It's the enchantment. So hopefully you guys can see how, again, she's using multiple forms of enchantment, but you can see how she's enchanting you on the stage. And that's why she has such a great TED Talk, because her research is terrible. Her science is more or less non-existent. Her conclusions are completely worthless to the world, but everybody feels connected to her. And she told a great story, and she allowed you to be part of that story. And isn't that nice? It makes you feel really good. It makes you feel heard and seen. It makes you feel part of something bigger than yourself. It's just not big enough. Thank you for your time, energy, and attention.